Welcome to another episode of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Christianson. I'm excited to welcome Emily Duncan, Senior Vice President of Federal Affairs at American Electric Power. And Emily, you're on week 7,
yes,
right?
Yeah, that's right.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your career and your path to American Electric Power?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So yes, I'm on week 7 at American Electric Power, which is a large company in the utility industry. I was at a utility prior to this. I was at National Grid for a little under 8 years, and for the last 2 years there, ran their Washington office. So a similar role at National Grid to the one I have now at AEP. And then prior to that, I was in the solar industry. So I worked for the Solar Energy Industries Association for about 5 years, working primarily on tax policy, but some regulatory policy as well. But I started my career as an energy regulatory attorney here in Washington. I'm from the Washington area, knew I wanted to come back after law school and have kind of a regulatory policy practice. And so started out at a law firm here in D.C. and was there for about 2.5 years before making the shift into policy full time.
Did you know you wanted to do energy the whole time, or was that a surprise?
No, I mean, I think, like all type A Washingtonians, I had this whole plan for my career. And of course, none of it has panned out the way I expected, but it's all been wonderful, right? I think there's all these kind of happy, surprises and different directions that a career can take. And I've been really lucky in that sense. And so, no, I really fell into energy. When I was interning at the law firm or doing my summer associate gig before I became full-time at the law firm, I was looking at a variety of regulatory practices and really loved the people in the energy practice and thought the work was really interesting. And so I just kind of fell into it. I could have easily have done, maritime or healthcare or securities or any number of regulatory practices, but just really fell in love with the energy one and have never left because it's been so great to be a part of it.
And you've never regretted not going into maritime?
No, I haven't. No offense to my maritime friends. I'm sure it's really fascinating work. But no, what I love about energy, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit, but it is just so essential to everyone's lives, right? And I think even more so now, it's always been essential, but so much of what we do and so much of the kind of our daily lives are caught up in energy. And most people don't think about it, right? They flick a switch and the energy, electricity magically appears and they're good to go, right? It's when people don't have that access, if there's a storm or an outage, when they really realize it. And so I love being part of an industry that's so essential to modern life.
Yeah, no, and I think that actually is a great segue into sort of the conversation about energy, which is so essential, and it is a huge topic of debate, whether you're talking about climate change, whether you're talking about the transition to electric vehicles or whatever that might be. So why don't you just talk to me a little bit at a high level of, what's the greatest opportunities and greatest challenges for electricity generation in the U.S. looking ahead?
Yeah. So, this is such an amazing time to be in the energy industry. I think there's kind of this old refrain that, Washington doesn't do anything and Congress doesn't get stuff done. And I think if ever there were a 2-year period where that was proven wrong, it's been the last 2 years, certainly in the climate and energy space, right? So between the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, there is just a massive amount of opportunity for clean energy and energy generation here in the U.S. And so it's a really exciting time to be a part of it. All of these grant opportunities and programs are being stood up or being fully funded now at DOE and DOT and the alphabet soup of agencies, if you will. And AEP is really excited to be a part of that. And then with the Inflation Reduction Act, these tax incentives that are really going to drive clean energy technologies are going to be so key to creating that certainty that a lot of businesses need to invest in clean technology. And so that's really exciting as well. And so I think there's just a huge opportunity now and a real runway for these technologies, these programs, and this investment in clean energy to take off.
That's fantastic. So there's a ton of investment. And so what do companies and others need to do to really make sure that this investment pays off or it works out?
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. And I think, the way that we've really thought about leveraging it at AEP and in the utility industry across the board is how do we partner with our communities and stakeholders, right? How do we work with our states and the areas in which we operate in and with our customers to ensure that, every dollar that we can capture for our communities is coming to our communities, creating jobs, creating that economic development that's so so key to America. And so a lot of it is partnership, right? So not only, there's kind of a two-pronged effort, right? One prong is like, what kind of opportunities are attractive to AEP that we want to invest in and grants that we want to apply for, but also how do we partner with and help our communities and our local stakeholders, approach some of these projects that where the money wouldn't directly go to AEP, but our communities would directly benefit, right? The customers that we serve, the homes and businesses that we serve can see a piece of that funding. And so that's another area where I think we're really working hard is trying to find those opportunities for our communities and our stakeholders there.
And let's take a step back and talk about where AEP is geographically in the communities that you do serve.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in 11 states. We operate in 11 states. We have 6 operating companies, serve, quite a number of customers across that service territory. But we are mostly in rural areas, right? We're not in a lot of urban areas. And so I think what's exciting to me about AEP is, we have such an amazing story to tell. When you talk about, whether it's onshoring of domestic manufacturing and part of, our supply chain, both in energy and beyond that, and you talk about kind of, revitalizing the manufacturing industry in America, a lot of that's going to happen in the Midwest where we operate, right? In the states in which we operate in. And a lot of that is bringing that economic development into those rural communities and creating jobs where perhaps there have not been jobs in quite a while, right? And so that to me is really exciting that, the areas in which we operate in are really prime for investment and prime for revitalization.
Yeah. And in terms of thinking about like renewable energy sources that are going into the grid and to our electricity, what are you most excited about? What do you think is going to be the most important one looking ahead? There's solar, there's hydro, there's nuclear, there's all kinds of stuff. Is there one maybe dark horse that you think is going to do better?
It's really interesting. You hate to pick amongst technologies. I love them all. I do have a soft spot in my heart for nuclear. I started my career at the NRC and at FERC and representing clients who appeared before those regulatory bodies. And I think nuclear has had kind of a few opportunities at a renaissance, and I think there's another one before it now. And the idea of small modular reactors and the potential that is in that type of technology to kind of create clean baseload power, but in a more mobile way, more modular way than what we see with the larger nuclear plants that exist today, I think that's really exciting, right? And there's lots of opportunities in our service territory, but also outside of AEP service territory across the country where I think small modular reactors could make a big difference. But, the whole gamut of it, right? I think that's the important thing to remember, too, is, diversity in supply is really important, right? We want to make sure that we have consistent and reliable power across the country. And so we want to bring these new technologies on, but recognize there continue to be value in existing technologies as well.
So you talked about things that Congress has already done.
Yeah.
When you go up and you talk to folks on the Hill, like what are you saying this is what you need to keep doing or do that's new to really facilitate the transition to higher reliance on renewables?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, Congress is stepping up on a big issue right now, which is siting and permitting, right? H.R. 1 hopefully will pass the House this week. And we are very excited about siting and permitting. We think that's kind of the next leg of the stool, if you will, right? To create these projects and to get these projects, shovel ready and projects in the ground. And so, building out that network, whether it's transmission, whether it's distribution, whether it's substations, whatever it is, we need all of that to bring renewable power to the grid and to load. And so that's kind of the next hurdle, I think, is getting, siting and permitting, meaningful siting and permitting legislation done and passed so that we can build these projects in a more effective and efficient manner.
Okay. Let's talk about electric vehicles.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of efforts, a lot of big announcements about, we're going to be done with internal combustion engines by 2035. From where you sit, is that a realistic goal?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that these transitions often take longer than we expect, or sometimes in some cases that we would like, right? I think we're all, energy is a good example of we're all on this clean energy transition. Some companies are at different spots along that transition, but we're all aiming to get there and get to net zero by a certain date. But there's going to be fits and starts. It's important we stay on that road. We don't take any exit ramps, but it's going to be fits and starts. And I think the same is true for EVs, right? I think you will see, and we have seen, right? Here in Washington, Washington, you can't turn your head without seeing a Tesla or an EV, right? But that's not the case in every city in America. That's not the case, in a lot of our service territory and kind of more rural areas. And so while I think there is a lot of momentum behind EVs, I think there are going to be, again, fits and starts to EV adoption along the way. I mean, certainly cost. We're seeing costs come down. The tax credits that, the Treasury is going to issue guidance later this week around the electric vehicle tax credits. But certainly tax credits will help drive down the cost of EVs, but the cost of EVs are still unattainable for a lot of Americans. There also continues to be range anxiety, right? I mean, if you're going to go on a long road trip, are you going to have charging stations along the way that are operable, that you don't have to wait for, 30 minutes or 45 minutes just to get to the charging station to then charge your car for 30 minutes, right? And so there's going to have to be some adaptation, I think, amongst the Americans to adopting EVs. So there's all kinds of things that are going to play into that. And I think the people who really want EVs have started purchasing them, and you've kind of gotten that low-hanging fruit of folks who are really interested in EVs. And it's going to get harder to get those folks who may not be as interested right now to convince them, right, that this is the right move for them. And I think it'll be a combination of costs coming down, the availability of vehicles. There's a lot of domestic manufacturers who are putting out all kinds of models that people can choose from, and then certainly figuring out that range anxiety piece and making charging widely available and making sure that stations are operable and that they are where people want to charge.
Yeah, and thinking about it in terms of the grid, I was talking to a friend who was sharing a pilot program that her company was doing where people would have their EVs plugged in, and that when the grid needed additional energy, they would be pulling energy from the vehicle. Yeah. And which sounds really exciting. How far away are we from something like that? Is that kind of a realistic sort of surge protector, I guess?
I like that. I hadn't heard that surge protector analogy before. That's already kind of a possibility, right? I mean, you already see like the F-150 Lightning has the capability to serve as a backup power source. That was part of the Super Bowl ad, I think, as I recall, for them. So you can use it as a backup power source if, your home doesn't have power, for example. And there have, to your point, been successful pilots that talk about or have used EVs as bidirectional, which is an industry term, a bidirectional charge to supply electricity back into the grid. Honestly, somewhat similar to what we've seen with, solar panels and energy storage, right? I think there is a real opportunity there. And I think the thing to think about that I find really interesting is, EVs typically are charged at home. That's mostly where people charge their vehicles, right? And they typically can do it overnight. And that tends to be what we consider off-peak, right? Off-peak charging, which is not when, most people are using their electricity in their home because they're asleep. And so there's a real opportunity there to use the grid for, more efficient purposes, off-peak, charging electric vehicles, charging up batteries and whatnot, and then using that, potentially extra power at other times during peak power needs during the day. So I think there's going to be a huge opportunity there amongst EVs, but also other technologies.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear a little bit more about what's coming for the future of energy.
Great. Thank you.
Every 2 weeks, Penta measures U.S. adults' feelings and expectations toward the economy. The Civic Science Economic Sentiment Index, powered by Penta, accurately measures movements in overall national economic sentiment and provides a more sophisticated alternative to existing economic sentiment indices. To learn more, contact us at pentagroup.co.
Welcome back to What's at Stake. I'm Andrea Christianson here with Emily Duncan, Senior Vice President of Federal Affairs at AEP. We're going to dive back in. So earlier, Emily, you mentioned that AEP is present in a lot of rural communities in the Midwest. Talk a little bit about how you're thinking about investing and delivering energy to those rural communities.
Yeah, so that's a big focus of ours, right? In creating economic development opportunities in our states. We have, entire teams that are really focused and dedicated to that. We are a huge infrastructure company, basically, if you think about it. We have plans to invest more than $25 billion in distribution and transmission infrastructure and over $8.5 billion in renewables over the next 5 years. So we are investing a ton just in infrastructure in our communities, which, of course, is great for the tax base in our communities. But in addition to that, we think it's really important to create jobs in our communities, right? And so one of the things we've been really focused on and will continue to be really focused on at AEP is getting other companies to invest in our service territory. So, I mentioned that we have a significant number of customers over our 11 states. But so our economic development team is really focused on, how do we make sure that we're creating, not only energy in these communities, but creating jobs and ways to keep these communities vibrant. And so, for example, we were part of the effort to bring Intel to Columbus, Ohio. That project represents hundreds and hundreds of highly skilled jobs. We're also looking at manufacturing, right, and creating manufacturing opportunities. So all told, we've brought in more than 9,000 new direct jobs to our service territory. And
wow.
That's just the beginning for us, right? We think there's so many more opportunities as we continue, as I mentioned, to onshore domestic manufacturing and really beef up kind of the American portion of our supply chains in energy and beyond. I think the CHIPS Act, right, which was another major piece of legislation that Congress has passed over the course of the last year here, is also instrumental, right, in creating that domestic supply chain for our country and our economy. And so that's a big focus of ours. I think the other thing, that's kind of top of mind for us as I think about, where policy and that interaction with our business and our communities is workforce development. We have a really large and vibrant union workforce, which is fantastic. We also have, our own kind of management level workforce. And one of the things we're really concerned about in both areas is workforce development. We expect thousands of jobs, thousands of people in our company to retire over the course of the next few years. How are we going to replace those jobs, right? How are we going to find the skilled laborers we need to build all of this infrastructure? Not only the distribution and transmission infrastructure I talked about, but we're doing a lot in the broadband space and building out our fiber network. With EVs coming on board, with more folks electrifying, their homes. How do we ensure that we have the people we need to do all of that work? And so that's a big concern of ours, in making sure that we have that skilled labor that can do those jobs. And so we work really closely with our unions who have excellent apprenticeship programs. We work closely to partner with community colleges and universities in our service territory in the 11 states that we operate in. To ensure that we kind of are building that skill pipeline over the course of these next few years here, as we start to see more and more retirements in the economy and in our communities. And so that's another big focus of ours, in addition to the economic development.
Yeah, and that's great. And I was joking earlier that, you're looking for jobs. Everyone else in white-collar America is like, is AI and ChatGPT going to take my job?
Right.
So there are jobs available.
Absolutely.
At AEP.
Yeah.
Doing all this obviously requires you to engage with a large set of stakeholders. So Penta, we're a stakeholder solutions firm. We think about stakeholders in kind of four broad categories, right? There's investors, there's employees, there's customers, and there's political actors.
Yep.
So how do you think about AEP, about prioritizing, engaging, dealing with tensions between these kinds of stakeholder groups? Like, what's your approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really like the buckets you've laid out. Because there are tensions oftentimes between those groups. We're seeing it right now, I think, between investors and political actors. There's been this huge movement towards ESG, environment, social governance, and that's what a lot of our investors are looking for, right? They're looking for how we're making progress in those areas. On the other hand, there are political actors who say, wait a second, why is this a focus, right? We need to be looking at, we shouldn't be discriminating against certain energy resources. Why are we focused so much on ESG? And so we're having to kind of walk, that's a balance there, right? We've got to do what's right for our investors, but we also need to recognize that the politicians and the people who serve our communities have a point here that we need to kind of understand and get to the bottom of. And so I think, what we really try to do at AEP is have conversations, which I know sounds really simplistic, but I do think sometimes people assume things about certain segments of the population and move on from there and make moves based off of that. And sometimes those assumptions are false. And so we think it's really important to sit down, have conversations with everyone, regardless of whether we're going to agree or disagree, just to understand where they're coming from. And I do think that helps to kind of get to know people on a personal level, get to understand their opinions, does help us bridge some of those gaps. It's not a panacea, right? There's going to continue to be differences, and so we're going to have to continue to balance how we approach some of these issues. But I do think communication, open lines of communication, and respectful dialogue are really important. I think, going to customers, that's really the heart of what we do, right? That's who we're serving every day, and that's the heart of our business. And so customers are really important to us. We communicate with our customers all the time about what they're looking for, what matters to them, and what's important to them. And time again, what we hear from customers is they want reliable, affordable power, right? I think throughout this country, whether it's due to inflation transition or, recovery from COVID, we continue to see, an affordability crisis, right? Yeah. For a lot of our customers, their energy bill is one of the biggest bills that they pay every month. And so it's really incumbent upon us to, while we're making this clean energy transition, keep in mind the fact that affordability has got to be at the top of our list for concerns. And we need to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind in these communities that we serve, and making sure that everybody has a fair shot at access to clean energy, but need to do it in a reliable way as well. And so that's really important to us, and keeping in constant communication with our customers is key to that. And then finally, for employees, this is an area where I think AEP also really shines. I've been at the company for only 7 weeks, but the first question I ask everybody I meet at AEP is, how long have you been here? And it is incredible. I have very few people I've met who've been there for less than 10 years. And I would say on average, it seems like everybody's been there over 20 years. It's really remarkable. And I think it says a lot about the company and the way the company treats its employees. And then employees want to be there, right? They continue to find opportunities within the company to serve. And that's really wonderful. And so I think, looking at what we do, which is such an essential service, I think is really important to our employees, and making sure that we do it right is also, in a safe manner, of course, is also really important. And so I think it's, going back to kind of the original theme, right? It's that constant communication between these various stakeholder groups, and showing up and doing the right thing.
Well, it seems like they have the right person to head up their federal affairs and communication with those groups. All right, we'll transition to sort of the final and more fun part of the conversation with a couple of rapid fire questions. So what is one thing people misunderstand about what you do?
Yeah, so I think, for those folks who don't necessarily live in Washington or work with government closely, I think there is kind of this, this bad view of lobbying, right? Lobbyists are kind of considered this evil, dirty thing. We often call it the Scarlet L, right?
I haven't heard that before. Yeah. Love it.
And I think, what I tell my parents this too, right? I'm from the area, and they still kind of wonder what the heck I do all day. I do think, the way I view lobbying is it's really about education. We are going up to the Hill or to the administration to talk about issues that they just may not be as familiar with. How many Hill staffers have the time to understand our energy industry, right? It's really difficult. These are complicated issues. And so being able to go up there, represent our customers, represent our communities and our company, and talk about the issues that are really important to us, that their policies, they being Congress or the administration, their policies would have an impact on, I think is really what we do. And that education piece, I think, is so important. And making sure that, everybody has a view of these complex issues and understanding them is vital for not just my company or our customers, right, but for our economy and for our country to continue to kind of move in an educated and positive way. I think we need lobbyists and advocates on both sides on all issues, right, so that the people who are making these decisions can do so in the most educated way.
Good defense.
Yeah. Thanks.
Maybe you're a lawyer.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. What has surprised you most during your career thus far?
Oh, gosh. I think what's really impressed me and really been such a benefit to me in my career is how willing everybody is to talk about what they do, right? It is very, very rare that I have ever approached somebody for mentorship or to offer myself up as a mentor to others where somebody has said no, right? It's just so rare, and I hope this is not unique to Washington. I hope everybody has these types of communities where where they can serve as a mentor or be mentored. People are just so willing to talk about what they do, to share what they've learned throughout their career, and that's just been hugely beneficial to me. Is just talking to people about how they've gotten to where they are, and if there's things I can learn from them. And so I think that's been my biggest surprise is, I think as I started my career, I was probably really, really shy and not, kind of nervous about walking up to people and asking for their card or asking for their opinion on things. But I have found that almost universally people have been more than happy to spend some time with me and tell me a bit more about what they do.
Yeah, that's great. And it also goes to kind of this last question, because a lot of people who come to DC, they are very young. They're excited. And so that's a really important thing for them to keep in mind. But also, what advice would you give young people who are just starting out in their career here in DC and just generally?
Yeah, so I think there's a few kind of adjectives I would use to describe what I see as somebody who's starting out their career that I think could really, benefit from if they were proactive, if they were inquisitive, if they're honest, and if they're optimistic. I do think, after a certain point in your career, you do start to get a little jaded. And so I love hiring young people, working with young people, because I think they tend to have this natural optimism. And I think that really could serve all of us well, right? To remain optimistic, there are going to be days, right, where we get a little down, but I think remaining optimistic is really key to being successful, because people want to be around optimistic people, right? People thrive off of that optimism and that positivity. So that's really big, I think. And I think being honest is really important, right? That's your brand. That's your value. Showing up and being honest at all times is really important. Being proactive is huge. I mean, I'm always looking to work with people who are proactive, who, I don't want to micromanage. I want to be able to give you a project and you go out and own it and do it. And I think a lot of managers and employers are looking for things like that. And then finally, inquisitive, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions and to understand, better what people do. There really aren't any dumb questions when you're starting out. Or frankly, even when you're at my point in my career, I'm still asking a ton of questions to try to understand the complex nature of the industry I work in. And so being inquisitive, I think, tells people, okay, this person's really interested in what they're doing. They want to be here. They want to learn more. And that makes people want to invest in you.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining the show today. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in for another episode of What's at Stake. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen, and follow us on Twitter at Pentagroup. I'm your host, Andrea Christianson, and thank you for listening.